Hi guys, in this video we're going to talk about Bernie's loss and do a quick evaluation of Tuesday's primary election, and then we'll look at what progressives need to do now to advance their agenda and what is the way forward for the progressive movement in the United States. Bernie Sanders has been routed in this election. Mini Tuesday was do or die for Bernie Sanders, and Bernie Sanders lost. As the polls predicted, this election was a blowout. Biden won Missouri 60-35, Mississippi 81-15, Idaho 49-43, and the key state of Michigan 53-37. Bernie won North Dakota 53-40, and Washington is too close to call. But Michigan was the state where it had to happen for Bernie Sanders. But he did not prevail. How did this happen? What must Bernie and progressives do now to make sure that at least some of Bernie's progressive agenda is included in the Democratic platform? And what mistakes must progressives avoid in the future if they hope to remain relevant? So why did Bernie lose? Number one is electability. Bernie lost the electability argument. 55% of Michigan voters thought Biden has the best chance to defeat Trump, compared to just 32% for Bernie. And this is partially Bernie's fault. Just a few days ago, when asked if Biden can beat Trump, Bernie said yes.
Senator, are you saying that Joe Biden will lose Michigan and other industrial Midwest states to President Trump if he's the nominee?
No, I'm not saying that. I believe Joe can beat Trump in it.
He should have said no. And in the last video, we said that Bernie should show voters why he is more electable. And while he did attack Biden on his record on the disastrous trade deals and the war in Iraq, he did not link that to electability. He said, Biden voted for the trade deals and I didn't. But he didn't say, Biden voted for the trade deals, Trump campaigned against the trade deals, and that's why Biden will lose in the Rust Belt states and I won't. And just like last week, we see that voters agree with Bernie on the issues, but they don't think he can win. The exit polls show that a majority of voters in Michigan, 58%, agreed with Bernie's Medicare for All proposal. Number two, Corona. Voters in Michigan, 51-32, and Missouri, 61-27, trusted Biden more than Sanders to be able to handle the coronavirus crisis. Number three, he didn't win over the right voters. Looking at the results, we see there's a massive generational divide. As usual, Bernie won the youth vote in overwhelming numbers, but the youth did not turn out in the numbers expected, and so in order to win, Bernie needed at least some traction with older voters. But even voters who used to support Bernie did so less this time. In 2016, against all odds, Bernie beat Hillary Clinton in Michigan by winning white working-class voters, 57-42. But this time, Biden won working-class whites with 51% to Bernie's 45%. And some of this probably had to do with the fact that part of Bernie's vote in 2016 was more of an anti-Hillary protest vote than a pro-Bernie one. Biden is now leading Bernie in the delegate count, 823-663. At this point, unless Biden totally implodes at the debate on Sunday, he will win the nomination. So what does Bernie Sanders need to do now? Simple. Bernie must extract as many concessions as possible from Biden. The entire political establishment is against Bernie, but he does have one thing going for him: people. Joe Biden knows that he will not be able to win against Trump without the votes of Bernie supporters. He's already called on Sanders supporters to unite and back him. Bernie must now use that to get as many policies as realistically possible included in the Democratic platform. A very radical policy that totally overhauls the American healthcare system, like Medicare for All, he won't get that. But he will be able to get things like free college. Back in 2016, He pressured Hillary Clinton to sign onto his free college plan, and free college isn't even that radical. 58% of the American people support it, and it would only cost $48 billion, which is less than the increase in military spending from 2018 to 2019. This is very feasible and will be a reward for the millions of young people who supported Bernie Sanders in 2020. But what about after the election? Bernie is old. He can't run for president again. What will future progressives need to do to push their agenda forward just as successfully, or actually more successfully than Bernie Sanders did? Avoid the word socialism. Bernie Sanders showed how far you can get even with the socialist label. But numbers don't lie. Socialism is an electoral liability. The majority of Americans, 57%, prefer capitalism to socialism at 28%. And the majority of Americans, 53%, say they would not vote for a socialist candidate. Now, that's not to say Bernie's agenda isn't popular, or that he couldn't win. I've argued in previous videos that Bernie can beat Trump. But calling yourself a socialist introduces an unnecessary risk. Bernie didn't win votes because he called himself a socialist. He won despite it. Whether it's Pramila Jayapal, Ro Khanna, or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the next person to take on the mantle of the progressive movement must avoid the word socialism at all costs. As I said in the previous video, progressives must root their vision in the legacy of FDR and the New Deal. Rather than calling themselves democratic socialists, progressives should call themselves New Deal Democrats, or literally anything else. And rather than looking to international socialism or foreign countries like Denmark, progressives must show Americans that their policies are rooted in a long tradition of New Deal Democrats who supported things like public health care, like FDR.
The right to adequate medical care, and the opportunity to achieve and enjoy good health.
Like JFK.
We are behind every country pretty nearly in Europe in this matter of medical care for our citizens.
Okay, so that was about labels. But was Bernie Sanders or progressives in general too far left on the issues? I would say generally not. But on 3 issues, progressives should not go too far left. Number 1, don't stand for open borders. Now let's be clear. Bernie Sanders never stood for open borders.
Open borders?
Open
borders. That's a Koch brothers proposal.
However, there are some around him or in the progressive left who have called for policies that effectively do that. That's not to say that the left should not stand for compassionate immigration policies. Most Americans support DACA, a program to give the children of illegal immigrants a path to citizenship if they haven't committed any crimes. But most Americans want border controls, and going so far outside the mainstream risks the other progressive policies, which are popular, from never being implemented. Number 2, don't abolish guns. Once again, Bernie has never been for abolishing guns. But people like Beto O'Rourke called for compulsory gun buybacks. Do you know what a compulsory gun buyback is? It's gun confiscation.
Hell yes, we're going to take your AR-15, your AK-47.
Not only does that go against the Second Amendment of the American Constitution, it's the fastest way to lose an election. You don't need to abolish guns to reduce gun violence. The majority of Americans support common-sense gun regulations like preventing people with mental illness or those on the terrorist watch list from buying guns. Or universal background checks, which has 83% support. The only reason these policies haven't been implemented is because Republican politicians have been bought by the NRA. You see, we are living in a populist era, and there are 2 reasons for that: economic insecurity and cultural insecurity. When it comes to addressing the economic insecurity that people are feeling these days, Bernie Sanders has done a spectacular job. It is true that income inequality is totally out of control. It is true that the rich have too much influence over our politics. And it is true that the cost of healthcare and access to healthcare is a major problem. But the left should not forget that people are also feeling a deep sense of cultural insecurity. Things like guns and immigration are part of that. And people like Trump and other right-wing nationalist populists around the world have capitalized on that. So the left should not go too far left on cultural issues. Instead, progressives should focus on economic populism and criminal justice and be moderate on cultural issues. Things like healthcare, taxing the rich, and the minimum wage have broad support, but going too far left on guns or immigration or national identity will cost you the election. Look at this graph. This is a scatter plot of the American electorate in 2016. From left to right, you have where voters are on left-right economic issues. From top to bottom, you have where people stand on social, cultural, and identity issues. Blue dots are Democrats and red dots are Republicans. And what you see is that a lot of voters, about 44%, are economically left-wing and socially liberal. About 22% are economically right-wing and socially conservative. But over 28% of the electorate is economically left-wing but socially somewhat more conservative. And these people are divided between Democrats and Republicans. And in order to win the election, it's these people that you need. So rather than being here and being very left-wing economically and extremely socially liberal, the next Bernie Sanders should be here, economically left-wing, but somewhat socially moderate, at least in tone. You see, the people who voted for Obama in 2012, but Trump in 2016, overwhelmingly fall into this category. And if one is to win an election, you need these voters. There is a third issue that is not cultural, that progressives should not go too far left on. Don't abolish private insurance. Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All proposal is basically a government-funded health insurance for all. That's not radical. It's been implemented successfully in many European countries. But what is radical is banning insurance. That's not been done in any other country. You see, Bernie's plan makes it illegal for private health insurance companies to offer the same coverage that the Medicare government insurance would offer. Since Bernie's Medicare would cover almost everything, this would effectively abolish private insurance. Now, this has not been done in any country. In every country where there is a national health insurance, you have the option to buy private insurance. Now, of course, you will still pay the taxes that are used to fund this government health insurance, so it would be pretty silly to waste your money also buying private insurance, but you still have the option. And this particular provision of the Medicare for All bill makes Medicare for All less popular. Medicare for All has 56% support, but when you tell people that it takes away private health insurance, it goes down to 46%. You see, while it's true that under Medicare for All, you actually have more choice because you can choose any doctor or hospital, while with private insurance, you can only choose doctors that are in-network, many Americans still want the choice to be able to use private health insurance if they feel it's necessary. Don't let this be the hill that progressives die on. If Medicare for All is passed, millions of people will abandon their private health insurance anyway because they are now covered by government insurance, so there's no need to explicitly ban private health insurance. 500,000 people a year go bankrupt from medical expenses. 40,000 die on the streets because they can't afford healthcare. And 80 million are either uninsured or underinsured. a petty dispute about whether or not to ban private health insurance should not get in the way of passing Medicare for All to save these people. Tell me what you think, guys. Like, share, and subscribe, because this was my take.